Officer David Hale was left bleeding and tied to a tree in the frozen woods, his loyal canine partner, Blitz, whimpering beside him, one leg shattered after the chase. The criminals thought the blizzard would finish the job, that no one would ever find the two before the cold claimed their lives. But fate had other plans. Because miles away, a firefighter named Eli Turner was driving home through the storm. When a faint cry cut through the wind, a cry that would pull him into a darkness far deeper than snow and ice. And what they'd uncovered together would expose a secret powerful enough to shake an entire state. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more stories of courage, loyalty, and second chances. The night over Spokane National Forest was white and endless. Snow howled through the pines, a living storm that erased the world. It was near midnight when Officer David Hale spotted the faint glow of taillights cutting through the blizzard ahead. The vehicle, a black SUV disguised as a private ambulance marked Midas Care Foundation, had ignored his sirens for miles. No emergency plates, no ID, just a lie rolling through the snow. David, 36, ex-Army MP turned Spokane County officer, carried both the discipline of a soldier and the silence of a man who'd lost too much. In the passenger seat, his canine partner Blitz, a 6-year-old sable German shepherd, growled low, reading the tension in the air. The cruiser's tires crunched over frozen gravel. Visibility dropped to inches. When the SUV slowed, David followed, until the red taillights vanished. Then the world exploded. Gunfire tore through the windshield. The first round struck David's shoulder, spinning him sideways. The car skidded, slammed into a snowbank. He hit the ground hard, instincts taking over. Blitz lunged from the vehicle, barking, but a dark figure swung a metal pipe. A crack echoed through the storm, followed by the dog's whimper. Boots crunched closer. Rough hands dragged David across the snow. His badge glinted once under the flashlight before a boot crushed it into the ice. "Shoulda stayed out of it, cop," a voice growled. "No one chases Midas." Ropes bit into his wrists. Blitz was tied beside him, bleeding and trembling. The men left them against a pine tree, their laughter fading into the storm. The sound of an engine roared, then disappeared into the white void. Silence returned. Vast, merciless. David tried to move, but the cold numbed everything. His breath came in clouds, each one thinner than the last. Blitz pressed his body closer, his broken leg dragging awkwardly in the snow. The dog's eyes stayed on him, dark and unwavering. "Stay awake," David muttered, voice fading. "Not like this. Not tonight." The storm answered with indifference. Miles away, Eli Turner drove alone through the blizzard. His old Ford truck rattled with every gust of wind. Eli, 33, was a firefighter from Sandpoint, Idaho, lean and weathered, still smelling faintly of smoke from the warehouse fire he'd battled the day before. He hadn't slept in 2 days. Through the windshield, something flickered, a faint red pulse deep among the trees. At first, he thought it was a flare or a reflection, but then it blinked again, slow and steady. He pulled over, grabbed his flashlight, and trudged into the forest. Snow rose past his boots. The cold bit through his jacket. Then the beam caught a shape. A man slumped against a tree, rope cutting across his chest. A police badge half buried in snow. Jesus Christ! He dropped to his knees, checking for a pulse. Still there. Weak, but steady, Saxtabad. Him, a German shepherd, lay breathing shallowly, one leg bent wrong, ice crusted over its fur. "Hang in there, buddy," Eli whispered, cutting through the ropes with his rescue knife. David's eyes opened briefly, unfocused, blood streaking his collar. "They left the truck. Medical crates." "Save it," Eli muttered. "You're not dying out here." He lifted David over his shoulder, then carried the dog, one arm at a time, stumbling through knee-deep snow until the headlights of his truck broke through the trees. Inside the cab, the heater roared to life. Frost steamed off their clothes. Eli poured water from his thermos over Blitz's wound, wrapped David's shoulder with a strip of gauze torn from his undershirt. The officer barely stirred, but the dog leaned into Eli's touch, eyes half closed. He tried his radio. Nothing but static. The storm had drowned every frequency. So he drove, gripping the wheel like a lifeline, headlights slicing through the white abyss. Hours blurred into minutes until the faint shape of the Sandpoint fire station appeared through the snow. He pulled in, cut the engine, and half-carried David inside. The room smelled of pine wood and smoke. A single stove burned weakly, throwing long shadows across the walls. Eli laid the officer on an old couch, wrapped him in blankets, then turned back for Blitz. The dog whimpered but lifted his head when Eli knelt beside him. "You're safe now," Eli whispered. "Both of you." He warmed towels by the stove, cleaned their wounds, and waited. Outside, the storm screamed against the windows, desperate to get in. Inside, the fire cracked softly, a fragile heartbeat against the cold. David stirred, eyes fluttering open. His voice was hoarse. "Where are we?" "Sandpoint Fire Station," Eli said quietly. "You're lucky I couldn't sleep." David looked toward Blitz, who lay curled beside the stove, chest rising slow but steady. His lips trembled, not from cold, but from relief. "Thank you," he whispered. Eli only nodded. "Rest. The storm's not done yet." Outside, the wind roared like a wounded thing. Inside, 3 lives clung to warmth, unaware that survival was only the beginning. The real storm, the one with gold tattoos and frozen hearts, was still waiting for them beyond the snow. Morning crept slowly into the Sandpoint fire station. The storm outside had weakened, leaving a silence so thick it pressed against the windows. The stove still burned from the night before, casting a faint orange glow across the small break room. Officer David Hale stirred awake on the couch, his shoulder bandaged, his badge resting on the table beside a half-empty mug of coffee. Every muscle in his body throbbed with cold memory. Blitz lay near the heater, wrapped in a thick blanket. His breathing was steady but shallow, his hind leg braced with splints made from spare wood and medical tape. David reached out, brushing his hand against the dog's fur. "We're still here, partner," he murmured, voice hoarse. The door creaked open. Eli Turner stepped in, his firefighter jacket unzipped, hair still damp from the melting snow. He carried 2 steaming cups. "Black coffee, no cream, no sugar. You look like the type." David managed a tired smile. "You're not wrong." He sipped, wincing at the bitter heat, then nodded toward Blitz. "He needs a vet, soon." Eli set his cup down. "Already called one, Dr. Harper Lane. She's driving in from town. Good hands, quiet woman, doesn't ask questions." An hour later, the sound of tires crunching over ice echoed outside. Eli went to meet her while David tried sitting up, gritting his teeth against the pain. Dr. Harper Lane entered the room with a practiced calm. In her late 30s, tall and composed, she wore a brown parka over scrubs and carried a worn-out leather bag that smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender. Her auburn hair was tied in a loose braid, and her eyes were sharp but kind. Years of emergency fieldwork had taught her to stay steady, even when the world wasn't. She knelt beside Blitz without a word, running her hands gently along the dog's ribs, checking pulse, temperature, reflex. "Compound fracture," she murmured, "and dehydration, but his vitals are strong." David sat forward, watching. He's a trained K9. He'll fight to stay alive. Harper nodded, but paused when her fingers brushed against the dog's neck. Beneath the matted fur, a faint tattoo glimmered under the light, a serial code. She cleaned the area, revealing a clear number, K9 A3117 SPD. Her brows furrowed. "That can't be right." David frowned. "You recognize it?" Harper exhaled slowly. "Last winter, 3 police dogs went missing after a human trafficking raid in Spokane. The report listed one of them as K9 A3117. I read about it when I worked at the regional shelter. They never found them." The room fell silent. Eli leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You're saying this dog was one of them?" David's stomach tightened. The memories of that operation flickered. A warehouse, medical crates, and the whispers about donor storage. He looked at Blitz differently now, the pieces fitting together. They were using the same vehicles, he muttered. Private ambulances, marked Midas Care Foundation, supposedly legitimate medical transport. I started digging 6 weeks ago. Missing paperwork, false donor records, fabricated signatures. I think they're moving human organs across state lines under the cover of charity. Eli's expression hardened. "And that's what you were chasing last night." David nodded. "They call themselves Midas. Like everything they touch turns to gold. They've been buying silence from hospitals, even cops. I didn't trust anyone else, so I went alone. That was a mistake." Harper finished stabilizing Blitz's leg and covered him with a clean blanket. "You're lucky you both survived. Whoever they are, they knew exactly where to hit you. This wasn't random." Eli sat down opposite David, the firelight flickering between them. "You said Midas Care Foundation?" David nodded. Eli's jaw tightened. "I've heard that name before. When I was serving overseas, in Ramadi, a medical NGO used it as a supplier for field clinics. A few months later, half our equipment went missing, and so did several local patients. The report was buried." David's eyes narrowed. "You're saying it's the same group?" Eli shrugged. "Same logo, a gold serpent wrapped around an hourglass. Hard to forget." The words hung in the air. Harper looked between them, unease flickering across her calm face. "If what you're saying is true, this isn't just black market organ trade. This is systemic." David stared into the fire. "They use rural hospitals, unregistered labs, pay off doctors, label every shipment as post-mortem donation. I tried to report it, but the file vanished from the system within a day. Someone high up is protecting them." For a long moment, none of them spoke. The only sound was the quiet crackle of wood. Then Eli broke the silence. "If the department's compromised, we can't go through official channels. You're hurt, your dog's half broken, and whoever tried to kill you knows where you work." David gave a weary nod. "Then we find proof, quietly." Harper straightened, closing her medical bag. "You'll need more than proof. You'll need time and trust. Both are rare commodities." Eli smiled faintly. "Good thing we're bad at giving up." The next few hours blurred into motion. Harper stayed to monitor Blitz's vitals while Eli patched the generator and restocked the stove. David used Eli's old laptop to access his police cloud drive, grimacing through the pain. Half the files he'd saved on Midas Care were gone, erased remotely. Only fragments remained: timestamps, photos of crates labeled humanitarian supplies, and one grainy image of a medical manifest listing blood types. Harper leaned over his shoulder. "That's not donor classification," she said quietly. "That's compatibility indexing. They're matching organs for buyers." David rubbed his forehead. "They're turning life into inventory." Eli stepped closer. "Then we start with what we have. You said the SUV had a serial plate under the bumper?" David nodded. 2 numbers, faded but legible. 982KZ. Eli opened the station's dispatch terminal, using his credentials to tap into the Idaho Fire Response Network. "We log every emergency transport that crosses the state line. If they're pretending to be medical vehicles, they had to request passage at least once." Minutes passed. Then the screen flickered. One entry: a Midas Care Foundation transport registered 2 weeks ago. Destination: a decommissioned research facility outside Bonner's Ferry. David exhaled sharply. "That's 60 miles north." Eli looked at him. "You can barely move your arm. You're not driving anywhere tonight." David's voice was steady. "Then tomorrow." Harper folded her arms. "If you go, you'll need to be careful. That facility's on private land. No warrants, no backup. You'll be trespassing." Eli's grin was brief. "Wouldn't be the first time." The fire dimmed, its light casting shadows over the 3 of them: a wounded officer, a tired firefighter, and a vet who'd seen too many broken things stitched back together. None of them were supposed to meet, yet the storm had thrown them into the same orbit, and something in the air told them it wasn't coincidence. Harper finished writing a few notes, leaving antibiotics and supplies beside Blitz. "He'll pull through," she said, standing near the door, "but he'll need a few days before walking." David's eyes softened. "Thank you, Doctor." She paused. "I'll check back tomorrow. Keep the place locked. And, whatever you're planning, don't do it alone." When she left, the silence returned. Eli poured 2 new cups of coffee and sat down across from David. "You ever wonder," he said quietly, "why people like that choose gold as their symbol?" David looked up. "Because it blinds the desperate." Blitz stirred, letting out a faint growl in his sleep, a sound like warning under the fire's hum. Outside, the wind carried distant echoes through the forest like whispers moving under ice. Somewhere far beyond, the name Midas was already waiting for them to return. The fire inside the station had burned low when Blitz stirred. His ears flicked once, then twice, before he pushed himself up on 3 legs, a low growl rumbling from deep in his chest. David sat up immediately, pain flaring in his shoulder, but instinct overriding exhaustion. The dog's nose pressed against his jacket sleeve, tracing the fabric until he stopped near a faint stain on the cuff. Something that had gone unnoticed through the chaos. A chemical scent, sharp and sterile, the kind used in surgical disinfectants. Blitz whimpered once, then moved toward the door, limping yet determined. Eli looked up from the workstation, bleary-eyed but alert. "He's tracking something." David studied the stain under the flashlight. "Chlorhexidine," he muttered, "used in operating rooms." He met Eli's gaze. "Maybe he caught it from that SUV. If it came from a hospital or one of Midas's fake labs, we might have our first lead." Harper was already pulling on her coat. "Ironvale's not far," she said. "There's an old storage facility near the lake. They used to ship medical supplies there before it shut down. If they're using that place, we need to know now, not tomorrow." David hesitated. Blitz wasn't healed, and neither was he, but every instinct told him this trail wouldn't last. He fastened Blitz's harness carefully, avoiding the injured leg. "He'll lead. We'll keep it quiet." The drive north was silent. The snow had stopped, but the air was heavy, the kind that made words feel unnecessary. Harper sat in the back beside Blitz, her hands resting lightly on his back as if steadying both of them. Eli drove with focus, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. Every so often, his eyes flicked to the rear-view mirror, catching the faint reflection of David's badge glinting under the dim light. When they reached the turnoff for Ironvale, the road narrowed to a single icy lane lined with rusted signs. The warehouse loomed ahead, a concrete shell with broken windows and a sign that once read, "Ironvale Distribution Center." The chain-link gate hung open. Eli killed the engine, motioning for silence. They moved on foot, flashlights off, letting the moonlight guide them. Blitz's nose stayed low, following the invisible thread of scent until he stopped at a side door. The handle was crusted with frost, but David noticed the fresh scuff marks near the lock. Someone had been here recently. Eli pulled a small pry bar from his belt. "If we're going in, we do it fast." David nodded, keeping his sidearm ready though his left arm throbbed with every movement. The door gave with a quiet groan, and the 3 slipped inside. The air was thick with dust. And something else, a faint metallic tang. Blitz sniffed the ground, then turned toward a line of steel tables along the far wall. David followed the beam of his flashlight across what looked like abandoned surgical stations. Stainless trays, IV hooks, and crates labeled Midas Care Humanitarian Aid. The seals were broken. Inside were surgical gloves, tubes, and half-empty containers of preservative fluid. Harper's voice was barely a whisper. "This isn't storage. It's a field clinic." Eli found a terminal still plugged into a power strip. He brushed off the dust and hit the switch. The monitor flickered to life, bathing their faces in cold light. Dozens of video files filled the screen, all dated within the last 6 months. David clicked the first one. A camera view from above a metal table, harsh lighting. A person unconscious, surrounded by masked figures in surgical gowns. The sound of machines. The steady beep of a heart monitor. The voice of a man giving quiet instructions. Professional. Calm. The kind of tone you only heard in a hospital. Then a scalpel flashed and Harper turned away, her hand trembling. David stopped the playback. "We've got enough," he said. But Harper didn't move. She stared at the list of file names. The next one had a date, January 14th, 2024, and a label, Subject B12, Verified Donor Consent. She clicked it before anyone could stop her. The footage began the same way, but the face under the light made her knees buckle. A young man in his 20s, sandy-haired, the same brown eyes as hers. The voice on the video identified him by name, Ryan Lane. Harper's breath caught. "That's my brother." Eli turned away, jaw tightening. David reached for her shoulder. "I'm sorry." Tears slid down her face as the video continued. Ryan's chest rising weakly, then stilling as the surgeons worked with chilling precision. The screen blurred as Harper shut it off, her voice breaking. "He disappeared last spring. They said he overdosed near Boise. I never believed it." No one spoke. The hum of the old generator filled the silence. Eli clenched his fists, memories flashing like sparks. The burning warehouse, the screams of trapped men, the promise he'd whispered to his dying captain. "Next time, I save them all." He took a long breath, steadying himself. "Then we end this. No more reports, no more waiting." David crouched beside a crate marked with faded ink. Inside were medical files, falsified donor records bearing fake hospital seals. Some carried government stamps. He felt anger rise in his chest like fire. "They built this on paperwork and blood." Blitz whined, ears pricked toward the far corridor. His tail stiffened, body tense. David motioned for quiet. From somewhere deeper inside came a faint metallic clang. A door shifting in the wind. Eli gripped the flashlight, moving first. They followed the narrow hall into a side room lined with metal cabinets. Inside one drawer were patient tags, some still smeared with blood. Another held external hard drives wrapped in foil. Harper gathered them wordlessly, her face pale but focused. "These might have the buyer data." David nodded. "We'll take what we can and get out before someone comes back." As they loaded the evidence, Eli found a cracked locker with old uniforms inside, white lab coats embroidered with the Midas Care logo. He picked one up, frowning. The inside pocket contained a folded photo. 5 men standing beside a medical truck, all smiling, all wearing the same emblem, the gold serpent and hourglass. One of them was the man who'd ambushed David in the forest. "Looks like they've been running this for years," Eli said quietly. They turned off the terminal, leaving the warehouse in near darkness. Harper paused at the doorway, taking one last look at the place where her brother had been turned into a number. Then she whispered, "He didn't die for nothing." Outside, the cold bit hard again, but it no longer felt empty. The truck's headlights cut across the frozen lake as Eli drove them back toward Sandpoint. David stared out the window. The reflection of the serpent logo burned into his mind. In the back seat, Harper sat silently, one hand resting on Blitz's head, the other gripping the flash drive she'd taken. Her tears had dried, replaced by something colder, resolve. Eli glanced at her through the mirror. "You don't have to do this," he said. She met his eyes. "I already am." For the first time in a long while, Eli felt a strange calm. Maybe this was what his captain meant when he said redemption doesn't come in fire. It comes in choices. And tonight, he'd made one. The road stretched ahead into darkness, the warehouse shrinking behind them like a wound that refused to close. Somewhere beneath the snow and ice, the ghosts of the forgotten waited for justice, and 3 broken souls were ready to deliver it. The fire station had become their safe house, though everyone knew that safety was just a word. The evidence drives from the Ironvale warehouse sat sealed inside a red toolbox under Eli's desk, their secrets pulsing like a ticking bomb. Blitz rested on a blanket near the heater, his legs still bound but his eyes sharp, following every sound. Harper hadn't slept since the night before. She'd spent hours scrubbing the blood from her brother's file and saving copies of the data. David, still pale from blood loss, sat near the door with his service pistol resting on the table. Eli was the only one who tried to keep a hint of normalcy. Brewing coffee, patching a loose window, pretending they weren't being hunted. But the quiet didn't last. It began just after midnight, a faint crunch outside that didn't belong to the wind. Blitz's ears pricked first. David lifted his head, listening. The fire hissed softly. Then came a dull metallic thud, followed by another. Eli moved to the window and peeked through the blinds, 3 dark shapes crossing the yard, faces covered, carrying rifles. His voice was low. "We've got company." Harper's eyes widened. "Here? How?" "Doesn't matter." David was already moving. He loaded his sidearm with one hand, wincing as the wound in his shoulder flared. "Kill the lights! Eli, back door!" The power cut instantly, plunging the station into blackness. Footsteps approached. A crash of glass shattered the stillness. The first intruder kicked in the front door, a flashlight beam slicing through the dark. David fired once. Clean. Controlled. The man fell backward into the snow outside. Another burst of automatic fire sprayed the room. Eli tackled Harper to the floor, shards of glass raining down as bullets tore through the kitchen wall. "Stay low," he barked, crawling toward the emergency locker. He yanked it open and pulled out an old fire axe. The intruders were coordinated, moving like trained operators. They'd come to erase witnesses. David ducked behind a table, returning fire when one man flanked through the hallway. The bullet grazed his ribs but missed bone. Pain shot through him, but he stayed up long enough to see Blitz limping toward the doorway, teeth bared. "Blitz, no," he hissed, but the command came too late. The shepherd lunged just as one of the attackers hurled a Molotov into the back room. The bottle shattered, flames rolling across the floor. The man swung his rifle, but Blitz hit him mid-chest, dragging him down in a snarl. Harper screamed as smoke filled the air. Eli grabbed a fire blanket, slamming it over the spreading flames. "Harper, move!" She stumbled toward the exit, coughing, but a burning beam crashed down between her and the door. The fire spread too fast. Blitz, still on 3 legs, barked once, then turned toward her. He limped through the smoke, clamped his teeth onto her sleeve, and pulled with desperate force. Harper fell through the gap and landed outside, gasping for air. David crawled to the downed attacker, his hand pressed to the man's chest wound. The stranger couldn't have been older than 30, his voice thick with blood. His mask had slipped, a sharp face, tattoo on the neck, the same gold serpent coiled around an hourglass. "Who sent you?" David demanded. The man's lips curved into something between a smirk and a grimace. "You think Midas stops at organs?" he rasped. "They buy souls, officer. Debt, hunger, promises, same price." "Where?" David pressed harder, but the man's eyes glassed over. His last breath came out like a whisper. "Cedar, Hollow." The gunfire outside stopped. Eli's voice echoed from the rear, hoarse from smoke. 2 down. 1 ran. The building smelled of burnt plastic and fuel. Harper crouched near Blitz, holding his head, tears streaking through soot. The dog's fur was singed along one side, but he was alive, chest heaving fast. David staggered up, scanning the room. The remaining flames were dying under Eli's efforts. Half the wall was blackened. The red toolbox, the one holding the drives, was gone. "Son of a—" He slammed his fist against the doorframe. Eli looked up, sweat dripping down his face. They knew exactly what to take. "They didn't take everything," Harper said weakly, pointing to the floor. In the chaos, one of the gunmen had dropped his phone. The screen was cracked, the case metallic, etched with the same serpent logo. David picked it up carefully, scrolling through the saved files. There was no signal, but the data was intact. Eli leaned closer. GPS map, multiple pins. David zoomed in. Dozens of red markers glowed across the border between Idaho and Washington, each labeled with a cryptic code. Harvest Zone 3A, 3B, 4C. One of them read Cedar Hollow Extraction. Harper's voice shook. Those are the collection sites. They're harvesting people like livestock. Eli clenched his jaw. Then Cedar Hollow's next. David locked the phone, sliding it into his pocket. We can't rush. We're bleeding and exposed. They'll expect us to run. We need to regroup. Eli nodded, but his expression was haunted. The fire had burned out, leaving only smoke and silence. He walked toward the broken window, staring out into the night. You ever lose someone and promise you'd do better next time? His tone was quiet, almost to himself. David didn't answer, but Harper looked up, meeting his eyes. Eli continued. There was a warehouse fire 3 years ago. Faulty wiring, explosion. My team went in blind. We pulled out 11 people, but one of ours, Gavin, never made it. I told him I'd save them all next time. Every one of them. Maybe this is it. He turned back toward them, eyes sharp now, not from anger, but purpose. I'm not letting another monster burn a town to the ground. David holstered his pistol, then we start with the phone. We decode those coordinates and find where Midas hides, but we'll need help. Harper shook her head. Not from the department. You said they buried your reports. I didn't say law enforcement's useless, David replied. I said it's infected. There's still a few I trust. He looked toward Blitz, who was trying to sit despite the pain. We'll move him to the truck, find a safer place to rest. Tomorrow, we drive north. Harper stood, wrapping her coat around Blitz's shoulders. Her face was streaked with ash, but her voice was steady. My brother was taken because I stayed quiet. I won't do that again. Eli tossed his burnt jacket into the corner, revealing a faded tattoo of a firefighter's insignia on his forearm, half hidden by a scar. Then let's make some noise. Outside, the snow had begun again, faint flakes falling through the smoke that drifted from the ruined roof. The sirens would come soon, too late as always. But inside that charred station, the three of them shared something unspoken, the understanding that Midas had declared war. Blitz limped to David's side, nudging his leg as if to remind him that this fight wasn't his alone. David knelt and placed a hand on the shepherd's head. You're still my best lead, partner, he whispered. Eli grabbed a blanket and tossed it over the smashed window, blocking the view from the road. We leave at first light. The phone on the table buzzed once more, a delayed signal catching up. A single message appeared before the screen went dark. Harvest begins tomorrow. Cedar Hollow. The three exchanged a look. No one needed to speak. The decision had already been made. The morning came heavy and gray, the kind of silence that follows destruction. The fire station still smoked faintly as the trio prepared to leave, its walls blackened, its windows shattered, a hollow shell of what once felt safe. David checked his weapon, reloaded, and glanced toward Eli, who was fitting a radio headset into his ear. Harper secured a first aid kit and wrapped extra gauze around Blitz's leg, whispering to him like she might to a wounded soldier. The shepherd's eyes gleamed with that stubborn spark again. He was ready, no matter what his body said. The drive north to Cedar Hollow took them through empty back roads. Snow fell in slow, silent waves across the windshield. No one spoke for hours. The GPS coordinates from the phone led them deep into the mountains, where the asphalt vanished beneath packed ice and logging trails. Harper broke the silence first. When this is over, she said quietly, I want to make sure every name they erased gets written somewhere permanent. David nodded but kept his eyes on the road. We'll get there. Eli leaned forward, scanning the map. We're close. There's an old silver mine 2 miles off this ridge, shut down in the 80s after a methane collapse. The marker on that phone points right to it. They left the truck hidden among pine roots, continuing on foot. The snow reached their knees and the cold bit through every layer. Blitz limped beside David, ears forward, nose twitching. The scent of chemicals grew stronger the closer they got. the same sterile tang from the Iron Vale warehouse, now mixed with oil and blood. When they reached the mine entrance, the gate was chained shut, a rusted warning sign barely legible under the frost. Danger. Unstable shafts. Eli cut the lock with his bolt cutters, his breath fogging in the cold air. If they're running a surgical setup down there, the ventilation alone could ignite a gas pocket, he muttered. David flicked on his flashlight. Then we keep it quiet. One wrong move, we go up with them. Inside, the air turned colder still. They descended a narrow path reinforced with old beams and cable lines. Somewhere below, machinery hummed faintly, the unmistakable rhythm of generators. Harper's grip on her flashlight tightened. They've got power. That means people. The tunnel opened into a wide chamber. Tables, IV poles, and crates of medical supplies lined the walls. The air reeked of antiseptic and decay. On one of the tables lay a man, breathing shallowly, an IV in his arm. Harper rushed forward, checking his pulse. "Still alive?" she whispered. "They sedate them first." David moved along the corridor, finding more, men and women strapped to stretchers unconscious. The sight turned his stomach. "They're harvesting in batches," he muttered, "taking whatever matches demand." Eli found a clipboard pinned to a nearby crate. "Shipment schedule, Route C to Spokane. Processing," he read. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. "They're organized like a corporation." Blitz began growling, the sound low and steady. David froze. From the shadows behind the far partition, footsteps approached. Two men in dark coats, armed, voices low and professional. David motioned with his hand. They waited until the men stepped into the light. Then, fast and clean, David fired twice. One fell instantly. The other dove behind a table, returning fire. Eli swung the axe from his belt, hitting the lights. Darkness flooded the room, broken only by flickers from the generator. The surviving guard tried to retreat, but Blitz leapt through the dark, slamming into him with full force. The man screamed as the dog's jaws locked onto his arm. Then a sharp sound, a knife tearing fabric. Eli grunted and stumbled, blood blooming across his jacket. "I'm fine," he gasped, though his knees buckled. David fired again, hitting the assailant square in the chest. The man collapsed. Harper rushed to Eli's side, pressing gauze to the wound. "You're losing blood. Sit down." Eli's breath came in ragged bursts. "Don't stop. If we don't shut those generators down, the air's gonna ignite. You have to—" David squeezed his shoulder. "I'll handle it. Harper, stay with him." He sprinted toward the sound of the humming engines. The generator room was smaller than he expected. A maze of fuel drums and cables leading to an array of oxygen tanks. Too much gas. One bullet, one spark, and the entire mine would collapse. He switched off the power one unit at a time until the room plunged into near silence. When he returned, Eli was pale but conscious, Blitz sitting beside him protectively, muzzle streaked with blood that wasn't his. Harper looked up, relief warring with exhaustion. "We have to move. That gas smell's getting stronger." David nodded. "We take who we can." Together, they unstrapped the unconscious victims, dragging them toward the tunnel entrance. Halfway up the incline, a metallic creak echoed overhead, the ceiling supports groaning under pressure. "Move!" David shouted. The explosion came seconds later, a thunderous roar that ripped through the shafts. David grabbed Eli by the vest, hauling him through the smoke as Harper and Blitz pushed forward. Rocks and dust rained from above. The tunnel behind them collapsed in a surge of flame and pressure, sealing off the lower levels. They burst out into the snow just as the blast sent a plume of black smoke into the sky. The mine entrance crumbled, leaving nothing but silence and firelight reflecting off the ice. David lowered Eli onto the ground, tearing open his coat to check the wound again. It was deep, but not fatal. Eli exhaled weakly. "Guess I owe that dog my life twice over." He looked toward Blitz, who was now lying beside Harper, panting, his body trembling with exhaustion. David gave a faint smile. "He's got good timing." Harper sat back on her heels, breathing hard. In her hand, she clutched something she'd pulled from the burning office just before the collapse, a plastic folder half melted from the heat. She opened it carefully, eyes scanning the documents. Then her voice cracked. "It's Ryan's file. It doesn't say he's dead." David looked at her sharply. "What?" "Status. In transfer," she read aloud, the words trembling on her tongue. "Destination. Redacted." For a long moment the wind howled around them, and nothing else existed but those words. Eli leaned back, closing his eyes. "Then we've got more to do." David stared toward the horizon, where smoke from the explosion blended into the gray sky. "Yeah," he said quietly, "and less time than we thought." The snow kept falling, covering the burned mine like a shroud, hiding the horrors beneath. But the truth had surfaced, and it wasn't finished with them yet. They didn't stop driving until the road turned to gravel and the mountains swallowed the horizon. The explosion at Cedar Hollow had drawn no headlines, no investigation, just silence. That silence told David more than any report could. Someone high up had erased it. By dusk, they reached an abandoned ranger's cabin buried deep in Bitterroot Ridge. The snow had settled thick over the roof, the trees pressing in like sentinels. Eli unlocked the warped door with his good arm, grimacing from the stab wound in his side. "Home sweet home," he muttered through clenched teeth. Inside, the place smelled of old smoke and dust. David carried in the salvaged evidence bag and laid it across the wooden table. Harper followed with Blitz, who limped softly but stayed alert, as if he knew the world outside hadn't forgiven them yet. Eli dropped his jacket, revealing the dark stain spreading through his shirt. Harper's eyes widened. "You're bleeding again." He waved her off, pulling a flask from his belt. "Whiskey works faster than doctors." He sat heavily on a bench, pouring the liquor over the stitched wound. The hiss of pain that escaped him sounded more like defiance than weakness. Harper reached for him, but he caught her wrist gently. "Don't waste your bandages. It's just a reminder." David tore a clean strip of fabric from his undershirt and handed it over. "At least make it a clean reminder," he said. Eli smirked faintly as he wrapped the wound tight. "Fair enough." Then, looking at David, he added, "We can't stay long. They'll come looking once they realize the mine went dark." David nodded. "That's why we're here. Off-grid. No cell towers, no roads." He unzipped the evidence bag. "These drives hold everything we need to destroy them." Harper knelt beside Blitz, whispering softly while checking his splint. "You think it's all still intact after the explosion?" "Some," David replied. "Enough to start." The cabin filled with the quiet rhythm of work. Harper set up the laptop and connected the drives while Eli leaned back, pale but steady, his breath shallow from the pain. Blitz rested beside the stove, his chest rising slow, the orange firelight dancing over his fur. Hours passed before Harper broke the silence. "I'm in." David turned from the window. "Into what?" She rotated the screen toward them. A map appeared. Lines of transactions, false charities, and encrypted hospital ledgers, all linked by the golden serpent emblem. At the center of the network blinked two words: Midas Syndicate. Eli pushed himself upright, wincing. "That's not a cartel. That's an ecosystem." David's jaw tightened as he scrolled through the names. Doctors, cops, politicians. They're everywhere. Police precincts, donor registries, even judges. They built an empire out of desperation. Harper's fingers trembled over the keyboard as she opened a new file labeled Containment List. There it was, Ryan Lane. The timestamp read just 2 weeks ago. "No," she whispered. "He's alive." Eli exhaled, leaning back. "Then we find him." Tears welled in her eyes. "Facility 17, she said softly. "Near the Idaho border. That's practically a fortress." David's tone hardened. "Then we go in quiet. No uniforms, no backup. They expect police, not ghosts." Eli looked up, face drawn with pain but fire still in his voice. "We'll get him out, Harper. You have my word." She gave a small, broken laugh. "You're in no shape to fight." Eli tightened his bandage again, grimacing as the cloth soaked red. I've been worse. When the body's weak, you let purpose hold you upright. David glanced at him. You need rest. You reopen that wound again, you're done. Then I'll rest when we're all out of this, Eli muttered. The generator buzzed softly in the corner. Harper opened another file, a surveillance feed, grainy but clear. A senator and a uniformed sheriff shared a drink with two surgeons, laughing over a list of approved donors. Harper turned away, shaking. They've bought everyone. David stared at the screen, his hands curling into fists. That explains why my report disappeared. They didn't lose it. They deleted it. Eli took a slow breath, the strain evident in his face. So now we hit them where it hurts. You said these drives map their routes, right? Then we use their own network against them. Leak the truth straight into every outlet that can't be bought. Harper looked doubtful. And who do we trust to spread it? Eli smiled faintly, blood still staining his side. The people who've lost something. You'd be surprised how loud the broken can get when you give them a voice. David met Harper's gaze. We'll need evidence solid enough to burn them even if they silence us. Facility 17 is our key. She closed the laptop, her hand trembling. Then that's where we go. For a moment, the three sat in silence. The fire popped in the stove, casting flickering light over their faces, scarred, tired, but still human. Eli finally spoke, voice soft but steady. We've seen the worst of what people can do. Now it's time to prove we can do something better. Harper's eyes softened. You really believe that? He smiled weakly. I have to. Otherwise, the fire I've been carrying inside me all these years was for nothing. David looked into the flames, his reflection flickering there. Then we carry it together, until the last name on that list is gone. Outside, the snow thickened, muting every sound of the world below. Inside, 3 wounded souls planned to face the monsters who fed on suffering. And this time, they weren't running. Blitz lifted his head at the faint crack of ice somewhere beyond the ridge, ears twitching. He didn't bark, only watched. A silent guardian, waiting for what would come next. The fire burned lower, but it didn't fade. Neither did they. The plan took shape overnight, drawn in rough lines over a torn map spread across the cabin table. Harper had memorized the layout of Facility 17 from the data files, a converted medical research center operating under the name North Frontier Recovery Institute. Officially, it specialized in organ donation logistics. Unofficially, it was the syndicate's beating heart. David traced the perimeter with a pen. They rotate medical shipments at dawn and dusk. Security runs light between the changes. We'll slip in with the evening transport. Eli leaned against the table, his bandaged side stiff, his eyes sunken but alive. 3 guards at the loading bay, 2 at the gate. I can handle the entry if we've got uniforms. We do, Harper said. The syndicate used medical scrubs and private security badges. I found the ID templates in their database. I can print them using the cabin's old photo press. David looked at her. You sure you can do that on your own? She smiled faintly. You think I've spent all these nights in the shelter system just cataloging animals? I used to help rebuild IDs for trafficking survivors. Hiding people was my real job. Eli gave an approving nod. Remind me never to underestimate you. By dawn, they were ready. Blitz, still limping, had his bandages wrapped tight but refused to stay behind. David had tried to leave him once before, and the shepherd had nearly broken the truck window in protest. Now, as snow started to fall again, Blitz sat alert in the back seat, watching the road with the intensity of a soldier. The drive to Facility 17 wound through a frozen highway that cut across the borderlands. By afternoon, the compound came into view, a complex of gray buildings surrounded by chain-link fences and guarded checkpoints. The front gate bore the emblem Midas Care Medical Transport Division. Eli adjusted his cap, wearing a white paramedic jacket stolen from one of the syndicate's supply vans. David wore the same, with Harper in a lab coat and surgical mask. The credentials Harper forged held up long enough for the first guard to wave them through. Inside, the air smelled like bleach and fear. Nurses moved briskly between rooms, faces blank, eyes downcast. No one spoke above a whisper. They passed through the main corridor where stretchers lined the walls, young men and women sedated, IV drips feeding into their veins. Harper's hands trembled as she read the patient tags. Donor E1. Donor E2. Eli whispered, "They're alive." Harper swallowed hard, for now. They reached the main surgical wing, where a double door labeled restricted access. Surgical prep blocked their path. David glanced at the keycard scanner. Harper produced a small data chip, slipped it into the slot, and the light turned green. Inside, the world narrowed to cold metal and machines. Dozens of stainless steel tables, surgical instruments arranged like tools of precision, murder, and, at the far end, glass containment chambers, each holding an unconscious person hooked to life support. Harper froze. "Ryan!" David followed her gaze. A young man lay inside one of the chambers, pale and thin, but breathing. His hair was matted, a faint scar running across his temple. Harper pressed her hand against the glass, tears spilling freely. "Ryan, it's me. I'm here." The machine beeped steadily, indifferent. Eli moved quickly to the control terminal. "If I kill the power to this wing, their alarms will delay by at least 30 seconds. Enough time to pull them out." David nodded. "Do it." Eli cut the breaker. The lights flickered, and an alarm began its slow awakening. Harper opened the chamber with shaking hands. Ryan gasped, eyes fluttering open. His voice was barely a whisper. "Harper?" "I've got you," she said, choking on relief. "You're safe now." But safety was a luxury they didn't have. From down the hall, the first gunshot echoed. Sharp, close, final. David's instincts kicked in. "They know we're here! Move!" Eli grabbed Ryan under the shoulders, grimacing as pain tore through his injured side. David covered their flank, firing at the approaching guards. Blitz bolted forward, low and silent, his growl rolling through the sterile air. He leapt on one guard before the man could aim, jaws locking on his wrist. "Back exit!" Harper shouted, pointing toward a maintenance corridor. They pushed through the narrow hallways, alarms blaring now, red lights flashing overhead. Eli stumbled, blood soaking through his shoulder. Harper screamed his name, but he waved her off. "Keep going!" David fired 2 more rounds, hitting the guard that had wounded Eli. The bullet clanged off metal, striking an oxygen tank. The hiss filled the air like a serpent's breath. "We have to move now," David yelled. They reached the final corridor, only to find the main doors sealed. Standing before them was the man David had seen in the Iron Veil footage. The syndicate's regional head, Dr. Malcolm Rice, a tall man in his 50s with surgical gloves and an air of absolute control. His eyes were cold and brilliant, the eyes of a man who believed himself untouchable. "You shouldn't have come here," Rice said calmly. "Do you have any idea what you've interrupted? The lives we've saved through this work?" "By carving up the desperate?" David shouted. "You call that saving?" Rice's lips curled into a cruel smile. "I call it balance. The world takes from the weak. I just make the transaction cleaner." Before David could respond, Rice drew a pistol from beneath his coat and fired. The shot hit Eli in the shoulder, spinning him back against the wall. Harper screamed. David fired back, forcing Rice to retreat toward the surgical wing. Blitz, snarling, lunged after him. The two collided near the oxygen chamber. Rice tried to shove him off, but Blitz sank his teeth into the man's arm. They stumbled into a rack of gas tanks. Rice's pistol went off again, straight into one of the tanks. The explosion tore through the facility like a storm. Fire and pressure hurled them backward. David grabbed Harper and Ryan, dragging them toward the exit as the ceiling buckled. Eli, blood pouring down his shoulder, staggered to his feet and helped Blitz up, half carrying the dog as they stumbled through smoke and chaos. Outside, cold air hit them like salvation. Behind them, Facility 17 burned, flames consuming everything, turning years of cruelty into ash. Sirens echoed from the distance. Not local law enforcement this time, but black SUVs marked FBI. Dozens of agents poured out, guns drawn, floodlights cutting through the smoke. David dropped to his knees in the snow, chest heaving. Harper cradled Ryan, tears freezing on her face as she whispered, "You're safe. You're safe now." Eli slumped beside the truck, pale but smiling faintly. "Guess we made a little noise after all." David looked at him and managed a tired laugh. "You've got a gift for understatement." An FBI agent approached, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a wind-burned face. She holstered her weapon, nodding to David. "We've been tracking Midas for months. Your explosion just lit up every alarm in 3 states. You did half our job." David glanced back at the burning facility, his voice quiet. "No, ma'am. We just finished it." The snow continued to fall, thick and soft, blanketing the fire in white. Blitz lay beside Eli, head resting on his leg, eyes half closed but alive. Harper held her brother tighter, her heart pounding against the fragile rhythm of hope. For the first time in months, no one ran. For the first time, the night felt clean. 3 months later, the cold had finally loosened its grip on Washington. The forests around Spokane glowed again with life, a green rebirth that felt almost unreal after all the ash and blood. The snow had melted into soft soil. The rivers hummed like they'd been holding their breath too long. For once, the air didn't smell like smoke. It smelled like forgiveness. Eli Turner stood at the edge of the sanctuary grounds, the wind brushing his hair as he watched the sun rise through the pines. His shoulder still ached from the bullet wound, but he could move freely now. A small miracle, considering how close he'd come to never walking again. The scar down his collarbone had become a pale reminder of how fragile everything was. He flexed his fingers and smiled faintly. Behind him, laughter echoed from the yard. Harper was tending to a group of rescued dogs, their tails wagging like metronomes of joy. Her brother Ryan helped her clean the kennels, his complexion better each day, though he still tired easily. The sedatives from Facility 17 had left lingering traces in his system, but Harper's care and her stubborn refusal to let him fall back into darkness had brought him back piece by piece. David Hale approached from the cabin, holding 2 steaming mugs of coffee. His uniform was gone, replaced by a gray flannel shirt and jeans. The badge that once sat over his heart was now locked away in a drawer inside. He handed 1 mug to Eli, who took it with a nod. "Still, can't believe you actually quit," Eli said, watching him. David took a slow sip. "It was time. I spent years chasing laws written by people who broke them first. Thought I could clean it from the inside. Turns out sometimes you have to start over." Eli smirked. "So you started a refuge instead. Valor's Sanctuary, huh? You always did have a flair for dramatic names." David shrugged. "You think I chose it? Harper came up with it. Said it sounded like what we were all trying to be, brave enough to heal." Across the yard, Harper waved at them. Her hair glinted gold in the sunlight, her white lab coat streaked with dirt. Blitz sat at her feet, now fully recovered. His left hind leg still bore a faint scar, but the shepherd's stance was proud, vigilant, as if he knew he was guarding something sacred. Kids from the nearby town had started visiting the sanctuary on weekends, helping feed the animals. They adored Blitz, calling him the hero dog of Spokane. One of them, a boy named Milo, no older than 8, with missing front teeth and a freckled face, ran up now, carrying a worn tennis ball. "Officer Blitz, you ready?" he yelled, throwing it clumsily. Blitz sprinted after it with surprising grace for his age, catching it mid-air before trotting back to drop it at the boy's feet. Milo laughed so hard he fell into the grass. David chuckled quietly. "Never thought I'd see him smile like that again." "Who? The kid or the dog?" Eli teased. "Both," David said. "But maybe me too." Later that afternoon, Harper gathered everyone near the front gate. The local mayor, a middle-aged woman named Charlotte Green, practical and soft-spoken, with streaks of silver in her dark hair, had arrived with a small crowd. In her hands was a folded cloth draped over a bronze statue. "Mr. Hale," she said, her voice carrying the weight of quiet respect. "The city wanted to do something for all three of you, for what you did, for who you saved." David shook his head. "We didn't do it for recognition." Charlotte smiled gently. "Maybe not, but Spokane deserves to remember." She nodded to two workers who lifted the cloth away. Beneath it stood a small bronze statue of Blitz, his ears alert, his eyes fixed forward. The inscription read, "He guarded the broken and gave the lost a home." Harper pressed her hand to her heart, eyes glistening. Eli exhaled softly, murmuring, "That's perfect." The crowd applauded. Milo clapped the loudest. Blitz barked once as if approving the tribute, tail sweeping the grass. After the ceremony, the visitors toured the sanctuary, meeting injured veterans, former trafficking victims, and rescued animals now living side by side. Harper had turned one wing of the property into a small medical clinic, while David oversaw security and logistics. Eli, though officially retired from firefighting, had become the unofficial handyman and counselor. When someone woke screaming from a nightmare, it was Eli who sat beside them until dawn. As evening settled, the crowd dispersed, leaving only the three of them by the porch. Ryan had fallen asleep inside, the soft hum of the radio playing an old Johnny Cash song. Harper leaned against the railing, sipping tea. "You ever think we'd end up here?" she asked. David smiled. "Not like this. But maybe this is how it was supposed to be." Eli laughed under his breath. "That's a dangerous thought, man. You're starting to sound hopeful." "Maybe I am." A gentle silence followed, filled with crickets and the faint breeze that smelled of pine and wet earth. Blitz lay stretched across the porch, his head resting on David's boot. The shepherd's breathing was slow, deep, content, the kind of peace earned, not given. David looked down at him. "You did good, partner," he said softly, "better than any of us deserved." Blitz's tail thumped once against the wood. From the distance, church bells rang, faint but clear, signaling the start of spring evening service in town. Harper turned toward the sound, her eyes warm. "Maybe we should go one Sunday. Thank whatever's still watching over us." Eli chuckled. "After everything we've seen, I'd say he's earned at least one visit." David didn't answer right away. He just watched the horizon, where the forest glowed gold under the dying sun. Finally, he said, "We'll go, but not to ask for anything. Just to say thanks." The wind carried their laughter across the field, mingling with the sound of children playing near the kennels. The sanctuary lights flicked on one by one, casting soft halos across the ground. It looked almost like stars had fallen to rest among them. Later that night, when everyone had gone inside, David stayed on the porch alone. Blitz stirred, lifting his head. The moonlight caught the gray hairs along the dog's muzzle, giving him an almost regal look. David reached down, scratching gently behind his ear. "We did it, old boy," he whispered. "We actually did it." Blitz blinked, eyes half closed, content in the warmth of the moment. David leaned back against the wooden step, exhaling. "We didn't win because we were stronger," he murmured, his voice soft but firm. "We won because we never gave up." The forest answered with a whispering hush, as if Spokane itself was listening. Children's laughter echoed faintly from the distance, mingling with the rustle of wind through leaves. Somewhere, a bell rang once more. And for the first time in years, David Hale didn't feel the weight of duty pressing on his shoulders. He just felt peace, fragile, human, and real. The light had finally returned to Spokane. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or light. Sometimes they come quietly, through a wounded dog, a broken man, or a stranger who refuses to walk away. What happened in Spokane reminds us that faith isn't about perfection, it's about perseverance. God doesn't always stop the storm, but He often sends someone to walk through it with us. A friend, a rescuer, a loyal soul who teaches us what love looks like when it costs something. In our own lives, we all face darkness, fear, loss, loneliness. Yet even in those moments, there's always a spark waiting to be found. That spark is faith. That spark is hope. And when we choose compassion over silence, courage over fear, we become part of someone else's miracle. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need a reminder that light still wins. Leave a comment below and write amen to stand with every soul fighting their own battle today. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us God still works in quiet ways and His grace often walks on four legs. May the Lord bless you and everyone you love. May He give strength to the weary, peace to the hurting, and light to all who believe that even after the darkest winter, hope always returns.